All right. Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, or good morning, wherever in the world you are. Um, Welcome to our keynote session, Girls Unplugged, the Student Designed Action Research Project on the Impact of Social Media. My name is Eric Walters. I'm the Director of STEM Education at Marymount School of New York, and I'm going to let Madeline introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Madeline Stocks. I'm the co-president of the Tech and Media Club, and this is the club that founded this project. And I've worked alongside with my co-president, Lily Spiro, and it's been something we've been doing for the last year, and we are really grateful to have this opportunity to share it all with you.
All right. Thank you, Madeline. Thank you for being here at the end of I'm sure it's been a very long day. So first of all, we sort of want to get a sense of who's in the room. So if you want to share your general location and role in education in the chat, we'd be happy to hear where you're from. So we have folks from Chicago. We have Mr. Buckley with us. We have Muhammad, who was at our session last night at 7 o'clock. So welcome back. We have Kim from Chicago. Muhammad's in Rome. So we have a good group of people joining us this evening, and we're looking forward to sharing some of the work that Madeline and Lily and the Tech and Social Media Club have been doing. So we're going to do this in two separate parts. I'm going to give you sort of an overview of the project, and then talk a lot about the results that the students got. And then we're going to move to a Q&A session with Madeline and Lily, where we're going to sort of do a deeper dive into their research, some of the things that have surprised them in their research, and their thoughts on banning cell phones in school, because that's become quite the hot topic, both at Marymount and a number of independent schools over the last few months. So this project began, and before we start, I'm going to let Lily introduce herself. So welcome, Lily. I hope basketball practice was good.
It was. Hi, everyone. I'm Lily Spiro. I'm in class 12. I'm the co-president with Madeline on the Tech and Social Media Club. And this has been a project we've been working on for quite a while, and we're so grateful to have this opportunity to share it with you.
And we're glad you're here too. So a little bit about Marymount first before we get started. We're an independent all-girls nursery through 12 school on the Upper East Side. We have 787 students. We are an Apple Distinguished School. And part of the ending statement of our mission statement is we want our students to challenge, shape, and change the world. So a lot of the work that we do in the classroom and in extracurriculars like the Tech and Social Media Club focuses on bringing change and understanding issues, and as a result of that, bringing change to both the local community and the global community. So the project that we're going to talk about today focuses on girls and social media. And the project started when I participated in a global action research project through the Independent Coalition of Girls' Schools. My project was on student autonomy in the classroom. And one thing that we noticed in looking at the media, and this goes back to the summer of 2023, was there were a lot of stories, and this is even before The Anxious Generation came out. There were a lot of stories in the media about limiting screen time for children, banning mobile phones. So when we started the school year in 2023, when Lily and Madeline and I had our first meeting, we talked about sort of what did we want the Tech and Social Media Club to focus on for the year. So I proposed doing a small scale action research project on tech and social media, but specifically focusing on its impact on girls. So because Lily and Madeline are pretty much game to do any kind of project and see it through to the end with their team, we decided that this is what we were going to focus on. At the end, we produced, the students produced a report, which is available online. And after we get through this, we will put the link to unless Lucy wants to copy it down now, the link to the report in the chat. It's available for download. We hope you read it. And it's pretty comprehensive in terms of thinking about the impact of social media on girls specifically. So we talked a little bit about Marymount. As we said, we're a nursery through 12 school. We're also part of a global network of schools. We have 21 schools in 9 countries. And the Tech and Social Media Club was formed many years ago. It's gone through a number of different iterations, but when they first formed, just to give you a historical perspective of this, at least 10 years ago, the club worked with Lucy and another educator to put on the first global student technology conference. So it was a conference very similar to this, that focused on technology. It was student run, and it was all student presentations. And we had students from over 40 countries participating. That has sort of morphed into this year's event, which is going to be in person, which is called, I don't remember the name because it's changed so many times, but something, the Students Social Media Youth Summit. I think that was the name we finally settled on. But that will be in person this year. And we're really excited about that. That'll be at the end of January. So for those of you who have never done action research, the goal of it is to just really do systematic inquiry in the classroom as a means of changing the classroom environment. So as I said, my project focused on student autonomy, and the International Coalition of Girls' Schools has developed a really robust action research program for educators worldwide. Just to answer the question in the chat, the conference will be in New York City on January 25th, 2025. So working as a team, we decided, the first step in doing action research is how does the use of is developing a research question. So we settled on how does the use of social media by teenage girls affect their overall well-being in daily life? We took this question to our school's independent science research advisor, had him review it. He gave it a seal of approval. So once we had done that, we needed to design a survey. And Lily and Madeline and their team worked on designing the survey. And this is where I took the role of the guide on the side, not the sage on the sage on the stage. And I let them do their work in terms of developing their survey. But students basically based it on 2023 Pew survey that was focused on teens and social media. That survey, the first draft of that survey, was also reviewed by our independent science research advisor because the students wanted to make sure that the questions were good and that the potential responses matched what they were trying to find. So we thank Mr. Getz for his invaluable contribution to the project. We administered a pre-survey in November of 2023 to Marymount students just to see. We just wanted feedback on whether the survey was good or not, like did it actually work? And we were pleased with the responses we got. The survey ran really well. And then in January and February of 2024, not 2023, we distributed the survey through International Coalition of Girls' Schools, our network of schools, my own personal connections. And ICGS was really instrumental in supporting us as well with this project, in so much that they were willing to do some PR for us with their schools as well. So we thank them as well because we wouldn't have been as successful as we were without their valuable contributions. So there were, in looking at the survey, and if anybody would like the actual survey, we'd be more than happy to share it with you. But there were 4 basic strands. The first one was social media use. What platforms are most teenage girls using? And that we'll discuss in the results as well. How do teenage girls get their information? And Madeline has a really interesting story about how she gets her information and then validates that information to make sure it's correct. And that was the other component of this is, are teenage girls using social media to validate their identities? And then in terms of are your parents monitoring your use of social media? How do you self-monitor your use of social media? These are all really important questions that the students wanted to have answers to. In thinking about the design of the survey, the students, Madeline and Lily, chose not to ask questions about cyberbullying because that can be a very tricky situation, and we didn't want to sort of end up in that area of research, partly because none of us are mental health facilitators, and I think we just wanted to sort of stay away from that kind of a topic. So in terms of the data analysis, we had close to 1,000 respondents worldwide. And then Madeline and Lily and the team went through all of the data to remove any incomplete data or any missing data. Somebody might have started the survey and not completed it. Sometimes there was their location was missing, their age was missing. And then once Madeline and Lily had their data reviewed by them, by their group, they also sat down with the independent school research faculty member, Mr. Getz, and he looked over their data as well. So by the time they got to doing their data analysis, they were really confident in the quality of their data. And to get 1,000 respondents worldwide, and if I remember, Lily and Madeline, most of the data was really quite good. Was that correct? Yeah. So I don't think there were many responses that were eliminated. So we're going to go through some of the results. Again, you can find all the results in the digital version of the report. But in terms of ages, it was anywhere between 13 and 18 years old. The responses we got were primarily from the United States, Mexico, Australia, and Colombia. Mexico, we have a sister school in Cuernavaca in Mexico. We have sister schools in Colombia. They were very actively engaged in it. I have friends and colleagues in Australia that were more than happy to help out. The one thing we found really interesting is that we got no responses from anyone in Europe, and we are not 100% sure why that is. Even our sister schools in Europe chose not to participate. So, it just is what it is. And, we moved on from that. In terms of social media use, one of the questions was, do you ever use any of the following apps or sites? And the one that I think surprised most people was that one of the most popular ones was YouTube. And then the least popular one was Facebook, as most students will say. That's the adult version of Instagram, and they don't use it. So again, anywhere from YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Twitter, and Facebook. And then just to go back one slide to this one, the results that the students got in their survey about girls' use of social media and what platforms they use aligned almost identically with a survey that was done by the Social Institute, where they asked teenagers in general, what platforms do you tend to use the most? In terms of general, like daily average time spent on social media, close to 60% spent 3 hours or more on social media. Less than 10% spent less than an hour. And it'll be interesting to see how that's changed now that Marymount's instituted a restriction on cell phone use during the day. So that's our sort of next interesting area of study. In terms of social media use, like right before bedtime, this was a really interesting question. Approximately 20% of the respondents said that, yes, they use it right before sleep and it affects their sleep. And then only about 10% said they don't use social media before bedtime. Speaking from the eye perspective, I'm only actually on social media during school. And then I usually check either Twitter or LinkedIn when I get home. But other than that, it pretty much stays off. And Madeline can tell you when we get to the discussion part of this about how her time spent on social media has realigned itself since we've restricted cell phone use. In terms of taking a break from social media, like doing a digital detox, about 30% said they had and they felt better. About 25% said that they had, but it was difficult. And close to 50% said they haven't done it. And what's interesting too is one of the things really interesting about the results is we wonder how honest students were about their social media use and whether they were sort of willing to be honest. That was the reason we didn't ask their names in the surveys, because we wanted them to be anonymous. In terms of seeking validation, only 5% said they seek validation or approval from others, but close to 30% said sometimes they do. And I'll be honest too, I'll post something. I don't post that often on LinkedIn, and I'll post something and I'll sort of get disappointed when not that many people either respond to it or make a comment on it. So it's not just girls, it's not just teenagers, adults do the same thing. And we're honest about it as well. So, okay. In terms of portraying a certain image on or lifestyle on social media, almost 30% of girls said that they do. Almost 45, 50% said they don't. And again, this was one of those questions we were unsure if girls were willing to be honest about their validation on social media. So in terms of conclusions, and then we'll get into the discussion about the survey with Lily and Madeline. As I said, most said they rarely or never seek validation from social media, but they do. Most girls said they feel better about themselves when whatever they're posting is either liked or they get positive feedback on it. They are on Instagram almost constantly or several times a day. They depend on social media for news, and they depend specifically on TikTok for their news information. Almost 2/3 said they use social media before bedtime. Those that had the lowest screen time usage were also ones that relied on social media the least for their news. The most used apps were TikTok and Instagram, YouTube, Instagram, and then TikTok. And in thinking about, I was at a session that was done by the Social Institute, and they always ask, like, which app do you think students are on the most? And most people will say Instagram or Snapchat. People are always surprised that it's YouTube. But if you think about it, it's really easy to go down the YouTube rabbit hole and just looking at videos, and that can take up a lot of time. as well. And then in terms of anecdotal evidence, we didn't ask this in the survey, but that students are using social media and their mobile devices for either communication or content creation. If you ask students at Marymount, not a lot of them use it for content consumption, but they're often creating their own TikTok videos, which they used to do outside my office all the time. And I'll be honest, we actually missed that. There was something fun about having students come in and say, I would never do it because I can't dance, but like, would you be willing to do a TikTok dance for us? There was something really nice about that. And I think it also helped build community. So, and it was a lot of fun. In terms of an action plan, Lily and Madeline have become well-regarded speakers in this topic. They've spoken at ICGS. They've spoken for the Rotary Club of Silicon Valley. They've spoken for a middle school in Virginia, and they spoke to a team of educators in St. Louis. So the word is getting out about like the work that they've been doing. We're looking now at, we took the research and we turned it into a formal research paper. So we're looking at publishing that research. They're also looking at doing more webinars and workshops such as these. And we've had requests from our upper middle school and from our lower middle school and our lower school to do workshops both for teachers and for parents and for students. And then really the other thing that we're sort of talking about is like looking at our school's own social media policies and making recommendations. Sort of the next step in the process, though, is because our school has restricted the use of cell phones during the day, we want to do a follow-up survey with students to see what impact that has had on their learning and their time outside of school. And I'll give one quick anecdote. Our upper middle school, which is 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, they turn their phones in the morning and they get them back in the afternoon. And if you're on the elevator with them when they've gotten their phones back, the first thing they do is they check their social media. So I'm not 100% sure it's effective, but that's my own opinion. So we're going to get into a conversation with Lily and with Madeline. One of the great things I love about talking with both of them is their refreshing honesty about their work and their use of social media, their use of their mobile devices, and specifically how they've developed healthy habits when it's come to using social media. So as we go through this, we have 5 prompts. If you do have questions, don't hesitate to put them in the chat, and we will make sure that Lily and Madeline answer as many questions as they can. All right, so Lily and Madeline, you're unmuted.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. All right. Because it would not be good if you were muted.
Yeah.
So our first question for you is, what challenges did you face in terms of project design, data collection, and data analysis? And I'll leave it up to the two of you to take over the conversation.
I can start. I think one challenge that I know we faced when we were curating the survey and creating the questions was the ability to foster honesty with the responses, because we didn't want to feel like we were attacking the students for their social media usage or trying to make assumptions because of them based on their answers. So we needed to curate questions in a way that would have the most honest and the most accurate data.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things I was going to talk about, along with data analysis. I think that was one of the biggest issues we faced, was just knowing like how to recognize like where students and where people our age like aren't being truthful. And once we actually like examined the data, and Mr. Walters, you spoke about this a bit, was looking at like the discrepancies between the majority of girls saying, oh, like social media doesn't affect them. And then yet the majority of them also saying that when their post receives likes, they do feel happy about it. And I think it's kind of working around that because it's not something that people are doing consciously. And we don't think it's something like that, especially because like from ourselves, from our own perspectives, we know like this isn't, we would have done the same. We would have acted the same way. So trying to work around that. And also with the design process, I think Lily's touched on this, was just really trying to get the questions in a, because it's really difficult and I didn't realize it until we did it, but you have to phrase the questions in a specific way, because if you leave them too open-ended, it gives too much, like we can't really collect the data from that. So being able to cater the questions to what we wanted to learn, that I think was a process that was really difficult, but definitely ended up working out in the end. And I think we're happy with the questions we ended up getting, but that was definitely a process.
So Catherine Kavanaugh asked in the chat, how did you manage not to write leading questions?
I think that was like the biggest challenge. And I'm going to be honest, I think it took, well, you know, we speak a lot about in science in our science classes, is the idea of like having multiple perspectives kind of roots out these issues, roots out biases, roots out all these things. So I think having just like, we had a bunch of us working on these questions. We had Mr. Walters, we had Mr. Getz, we had all these inputs just helping us. And I think just having multiple perspectives on it, like allowed us to kind of like filter out where we were maybe, you know, steering away from what we really wanted to get at.
Yeah, I think having me and Madeline also being young girls and being able to put ourselves in the perspectives of the respondents also helped, because we would have thought if we were taking the survey, like what would we have wanted? And so like having our influence, especially like as girls, which is who the survey was going to, was really important, that it wasn't just curated by adults or like specialists, but it was like also people experiencing the effects of it, but also using other people's perspective that were different than ours, to make sure we weren't missing anything or misconstruing anything in the survey.
Good. And were you surprised that you had close to 1,000 responses?
Yeah, we were very happily surprised.
Yeah, it was a pleasant surprise for sure.
I remember looking at one time and you had like 100 and they were mostly Marymount, New York students. And then all of a sudden it just sort of exploded and you were up to about 600 from all over the world. So that was really great to see as well. So I think you definitely tapped a vein of interest in a lot of students and a lot of teachers as well. All right, next question. We talked about this already, but how did you verify the quality of your data?
We individually went through, we kind of like took different chunks and we went through it as a team in Google spreadsheets, and Madeline can talk about like what we did after that.
Yeah, we just kind of focused on, like you've already said, Mr. Walters, but questions where it's like they weren't filled out, questions that, yeah, in general, like questions that weren't filled out, questions that, you know, had like some answers missing, or it was difficult, definitely. But I think what ended up being more difficult was even finding those questions, because like we've spoken about, is that there weren't actually that many. We feel that we did get a great amount, and like obviously there are always questions, like there are always responses that are an exception to what we found, and we still never treated those as like inaccurate. We just kind of, you know, looked at kind of what the majority of students were saying, what the majority of girls our age were feeling, and we kind of like took and led with that. But I think like to weed out like the ones that were truly inaccurate, we looked at stuff that just was like incomplete or just like randomly selected.
Was there a question that you wanted to ask but you didn't?
I think we wanted to directly ask like kind of something along the lines of self-esteem or like image, but we did ask kind of that kind of question with like, do you feel validation? But it wasn't as direct and it wasn't as like accusatory in a way. And also I think like when you're asked like those type of questions, like you automatically shut off and become defensive. So like that's when we had to to, like, even though we wanted to get the answer to that question, like, we knew that wasn't the right way to get it.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think now looking back, especially now that I'm, living at school and like my phone's being taken away, I wish we had gotten more into just the idea of like people restricting your social media and tech access versus like you restricting it yourself and just diving deeper into that field. I feel like that would have been interesting. I know that's something we've definitely been speaking about, is looking into that more. So maybe I would probably say that question.
All right. What surprised you about your data or your results?
I think like what you said before, the YouTube surprised me, because I personally don't use YouTube unless it's for academic purposes. But we had to understand that this was like a global survey, so not everyone is alike. What we use in like New York and the United States. What also surprised me was the people who I believe like said that they monitored their own usage, had better sleep hours, and had better management over the time they were spending. I think they had lower hours of the amount of time they spent on social media, which shows that like self-restriction very much improves like your relationship with social media, and your ability to do that is really important.
Yeah, I think I was gonna say the same thing as Lily. Was like, because we had been talking about like, our phones being taken away, and we knew we had 2 questions. Your parents monitor your screen time, and what's the scale? Like 1 being they really don't, and 5 being like they really do. And then we asked the same question, but like, do you monitor your own screen time? And we were just like, oh, it'd be cool. Like we were like, let's just like look through this and see like that the screen time hours, and just see like, can we find any connection? Because we were both saying, and we've been speaking about a lot at these conferences, like that when we have been given control over our own like use of technology, use of our phones, computers, we feel like we're better at restricting ourselves. And we looked at it, and it was just overall like the majority of the people we saw that limited their screen time more than their parents did, like their screen times overall were lower. And so we just thought that was very interesting. It wasn't something that and I think that's kind of what's gotten us like more inspired to look into this idea of like having young girls and having young people as a general be more engaged and more involved in their own control. And I think also one of the big ones that surprised me, because I think it just reminded me a lot of myself, was when people were like, "Oh, TikTok is like this source I use most," and it's also aligned with like this. I use social media the most for news, and for me, that wasn't something I'd really thought about. But then it made me think about how much I use TikTok for news, and I think that was eye opening for me, and it also made me want to look more into how we kind of work in this new world where the traditional news sources no longer are just like the only news sources, and like how do we work from there.
So, Madeline, you mentioned the fact that you get a lot of your news from TikTok. I remember having a conversation with you one time where you talked about how you verify the information you see on TikTok. So, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I think like this is something like my parents, whenever they like hear me bring up a news story, they're always like, "Where'd you get this from?" And I go TikTok, and they're like, "Is that true?" And then I always have to explain to them. So I think
What do you explain to them? I'm curious.
well, that's what I explained to them, is like what I'm about to explain is that whenever I do see something on my news, like on my For You page, especially if it seems really ridiculous, and often it can. I remember when there was this New York owl named Flacco, and he escaped from one of the zoos. I want to say it was the Bronx Zoo, but he was like this very rare owl, and I saw it all over my TikTok, and I was like, this is crazy. And then I searched it up, and the way I really fact check the information that I see on TikTok is by looking at reliable news sources. And for me, that's just like going to the news app on my phone or going to Safari and just searching up what I see. And from there, I'm like, oftentimes I'm able to verify. And even if like sometimes what I see is that like the story may be true or like the headline is true, but like the contents of the TikTok don't always match with the contents of the news article. So it's just helpful for me. It's a way to make sure the information I'm consuming is accurate. And I think it's, something that my parents really drilled into me. And this is what I always have to explain to them. So I try and be as informed as possible when I bring them TikTok news.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to let ask Lily answer this question first. Like, how do you manage your own social media use? And specifically, how have you personally developed healthy habits in terms of social media use? And how have you worked with your parents to help develop healthy habits as well?
Yeah, so me from a young age, my parents were pretty strict about social media. I got a phone when I was in fifth grade because of like New York City transportation and such. A lot of kids get phones around that age because they need to communicate with their parents about where they are getting home and things like that. And I would say that was pretty standard in my school. And then I was allowed to get one social media when I was 13, and I got the rest at the end of freshman year of my high school, which was later than the average person in our school, I would say. Um, and I also had went through a lot of things like time limits. They had an app where like my Wi-Fi would be shut off. There was another app where my phone would just shut down. Um, but once I got into high school, a lot of that really pulled back, and I had to figure out myself how to manage my social media use. So I do a lot of sports. So when I get home at night, I don't really have a lot of time to be wasted on my phone because the homework is very pressing. So usually I leave my phone in another room. That limits the distraction of basically just being in front of me because I see oftentimes I don't even want to be on my phone. I just pick it up because it's there. And then that leads to a whole multitude of things. So I think leaving it in another room eliminates distraction completely, or I'll leave it like at a different side of my room. So I'd have to physically get up, which is a good deterrent for me. Because sometimes I can be quite lazy when I'm doing my homework. Um, and I also try to set limits on my TikTok app, which will tell me how long I've spent on the app, just like give me a reminder. And yeah, I find with managing my parents now, um, sometimes I'll ask them to take my phone away if I'm having trouble focusing, or I'll ask them like, "Hey, can you just hold this for an hour and don't give it back to me until I'm done doing work?" Works better than them taking my phone from me, which then I want to like be defensive about my phone usage and um, retaliate against it. So I think that's the best way we managed it because they trust me with my social media use and they trust me with my phone usage. Um, and like having that trust, I think, was the most important thing that happened as I got older.
I know, like in my family, we have a rule called no dinner service, which means your phone is away and off when you're having dinner. That's worked really, really well. We're going to get to the next question. I'm just going to reference something that Madeline said before about how she's been known to throw her phone across the room so that she can keep it away from herself when she's doing work. We have about 10 minutes left, and I want to get to the next question and then leave time for Q&A from the group. But this one sparks a lot of really interesting responses. So Marymount recently required students to put their phones in yonder pouches. I'll let both of you answer this question. What are your thoughts?
I think for me, and like you've spoken about this, is like I've noticed this in myself is immediately when I get home, like I find it so much more difficult to pull myself away from my phone because it's just like this idea, and it is stupid, and I can recognize it's irrational, but we're humans are irrational. But like I get home and I just like feel like, oh, what, I haven't been on my phone at all today, so like I deserve a bit of time to go through TikTok. And I just think that idea is something that a lot of students are feeling. And this is overall kind of what Lou and I have been like speaking about. Like, we speak about it together a lot. It's the idea that like when parents and when other people restrict you, it's not as effective. I think for the middle school, I mean, when we were in middle school at Marymount, they took away our phones. So that has never been something, and I would never recommend changing that. Definitely for middle school, having stricter procedures and protocol is so helpful because you're just less mature. But I think for the high school, and especially for the upperclassmen, 11th and 12th graders, I almost think that taking away phones kind of instills bad habits because as we're preparing to go to college now, and the idea that no one's going to be there to take away our phone during the day when we have to do schoolwork. So it's just kind of like it's an outside force making us do it. So no one's really learning how to do it themselves. And I think that becomes really dangerous. And I think it's important that we teach students and we teach like girls our age how to manage their phone and how to manage their use of technology, not just, try and restrict it overall, because I just don't think that's as effective.
Yeah, I think people like me and Madeline, we've said at school it hasn't really felt that different because we've learned to manage our phones in school and we have those good habits instilled in us. But for people that didn't come to that conclusion or don't know how to manage their phone usage, um, they're not going to be able to like have this crucial experimental time in their life, which is high school, to learn how to manage distractions.
And I taught both Madeline and Lily last year, and I teach Lily this year. And you're allowed to use your phones in class. We just unlock the pouch. You do what you need to do with it, and then it goes back in the pouch. I would agree with also that restricting usage, you don't learn responsible behavior. And, the corollary to that is when the use of the elevator was banned, students' first thing was like, I'm going to find a way to get on that elevator. So students find a way to get around the yonder pouches as well. So that's because, as Mr. Buckley and I always say, you're kids. And that's part of your job, is to find ways to get around things. And that's quite okay with us. Mm-hmm. So we have 5 minutes left. We just wanted to see if there are any questions in the chat or the comments that for Lily or for Madeline. If they are, you can certainly type them in. Madeline has disappeared. Lily's disappeared. So Catherine has a question. In what way will this research influence your future in the next 5 years?
I think that's really good. I don't think we've ever been asked that question.
Oh, that's a new one.
I know. I appreciate that, though. I feel like just knowing how much of an effect social media has that, we can't recognize it always. Because I really think about that question where like girls responded to it and being like, no, it didn't matter to me. But then actually showing to us that it did matter to them. And I think just taking that more into account, I definitely think like going into college, just using the habits that my parents have instilled in me and that I've built already and like that Lily's spoken about, and really trying to implement them because we see like how effective they are, and really just trying to teach other people and help other people become in control over their own social media usage. So I think those will be some of the guiding things that I'm like, feel like this research project has instilled in me.
Yeah, I think even just like what Madeline said, a heightened awareness, if anything, has come from this research project for me and for others. So I think that if anything, like we'll carry all of the lessons we've learned with the project in the next 5 years, and maybe even like continuing to study like the relationship between technology and mental health on a broader level, even in college.
Excellent. And of course, you'll have to come back to Marymount to share your research.
Yeah.
I don't see any other questions under the comments. So Lily and Madeline, do you have any last words? Anything you'd like to share?
We just really hope that you guys enjoyed the presentation, and we hope that the research and the conversation continues to flow even like outside of our presentations, and we create a heightened awareness about girls and social media usage.
Yeah, I think that's all we can hope for, is that people have more open and honest discussions about social media usage.
All right. And I'm just going to say, I've said this publicly before, and I will say it publicly again. I could not be more proud of the work that the two of you did and your whole little research team, even, and adding in Colleen and who was the other one? Cecilia, who have graduated and are now in college. And just, we've asked you to do a lot when it comes to these presentations, and you step up every single time, but just what a great voice for the next generation the two of you are. And as your teacher, I couldn't be any more prouder than I am. So I just appreciate all the work that you've done. And you've never said no to anything. And I mean, God bless you for that. So on a professional note, we want to thank everyone at Glow for their support, for the communication. We want to thank Lucy Gray for another really great opportunity and another great 2-day conference. And we look forward to working with Glow and with Lucy going forward on many more things. So thank you so much for coming to our session. We really do appreciate it. And we wish you either a good night or a good morning or a good afternoon. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
For the shout outs.